My fiancé, Leo, ended our engagement with a text message, claiming his mayoral father found my freelance career too unstable for their family. I replied with a simple, "I understand." They must have been so confused on election night, watching his father's dynasty crumble on live television, all thanks to the political campaign I secretly designed. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The notification sound was innocuous, a cheerful little chime that was completely at odds with the sterile silence of the hospital room. I was sitting in a stiff, vinyl chair, my gaze fixed on my mother's sleeping face. Her breathing was shallow, punctuated by the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor, a sound that had become the metronome of my life for the past 48 hours. Dee had a scare, a sudden dizzy spell at home that turned out to be a combination of exhaustion and dangerously low blood pressure. The doctors said she would be fine, but she needed rest. And so, I rested with her, my world shrinking to the 4 pale green walls of her room. My phone chimed again. I'd been ignoring it, letting the messages and emails pile up. My clients knew I was on a family emergency, everything else could wait. But this was a text message, and my heart gave a small, hopeful flutter. It had to be Leo. He knew where I was. He'd called yesterday morning, his voice thick with what I had interpreted as concern. "Just focus on your mom, Nat," he had said. "Don't worry about anything else. I'll handle things." I thought he meant he would handle rescheduling our venue tour or calling the caterer to postpone our tasting appointment. I thought he was being the supportive fiancé I had always believed him to be. So when I finally glanced at my phone, I was expecting a message of love, of solidarity. Something like, "Thinking of you, how is she?" Instead, the words on the screen seemed to blur, the letters rearranging themselves into a nonsensical, cruel joke. "Leo, Natalie, I've been doing a lot of thinking. This situation with your mom, it's just highlighted some things for my family. We need stability right now, especially with my father's campaign. My dad and I had a long talk. He doesn't feel your career is stable enough for the kind of life I need to build. He thinks you lack the ambition to be a true partner to someone in my position. I'm sorry to do this now, but I don't think we can move forward. The engagement is off. I hope you understand." I read it once, then a second time. My breath hitched in my throat, a sharp, painful gasp that made my sleeping mother stir slightly. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to force the words to disappear. Maybe I was hallucinating from lack of sleep. Maybe this was a stress-induced nightmare. But when I opened my eyes, the text was still there. Cold, clinical, final. He hadn't even done me the courtesy of a phone call. After 3 years, after countless promises and shared dreams, he had dismantled our future with a few swipes of his thumb while I sat by my sick mother's bedside. "He thinks you lack the ambition." The words echoed in the silent room, bouncing off the heart monitor's steady beat. Ambition. He was talking to me about ambition? Me, who had built a business from scratch with nothing but a used laptop and a relentless work ethic. Me, who had worked 18-hour days to meet deadlines, who had sacrificed weekends and holidays to build a portfolio that was finally earning me national recognition. My hands trembled as I typed my reply. I considered 100 different responses. I could rage, I could cry, I could beg. I could list my accomplishments, defend my honor, tell him exactly what I thought of him and his domineering father. But as I looked at my mother, her face so peaceful in sleep, a strange calm washed over me. The fury was there, a white-hot coil in my stomach, but it was overshadowed by a sudden, chilling clarity. They saw me as weak, unstable, a liability. They had no idea who I really was, and they had no idea what I was capable of. So I wrote back 2 words, the simplest, most cutting response I could think of. "Me, I understand." I sent it, then blocked his number. I blocked his social media, his email, everything. I erased him from my digital life with a few decisive taps. As I put my phone away, the heart monitor continued its steady, rhythmic beep. It was a sound of survival, a sound of life going on. In that sterile hospital room, a promise bloomed in the wreckage of my heart. They wanted to see ambition. They wanted to understand stability. I would show them. I would show them all. The betrayal was worse than any diagnosis, but the recovery, I vowed, would be spectacular. The 2 days that followed were a blur of forced smiles and hollow reassurances. My mother was discharged looking pale but relieved to be home. She fretted over me, her brow furrowed with concern. "You look so tired, Natalie," she'd say, patting my hand. "Is everything all right with you and Leo? He hasn't called." "We're fine, Mom," I lied, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "He's just busy with the campaign." The lie was a shield, protecting her from the shrapnel of my imploded life. She didn't need my heartbreak on top of her own health scare. So I played the part of the devoted daughter, fetching her tea, fluffing her pillows, and talking about anything and everything except the gaping hole where my future used to be. But at night, alone in the guest room of my childhood home, the facade crumbled. The grief was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest until I could barely breathe. I scrolled through old photos on my phone, me and Leo at the beach, his arms slung around me, me and Leo at Christmas, wearing matching ridiculous sweaters, me and Leo on the day he proposed, his face alight with a smile I had believed was just for me. Had it all been a lie? Had his family's disapproval been lurking beneath the surface all along? A silent poison seeping into the foundations of our relationship. Harrison Vance, Leo's father, was the incumbent mayor, a man whose public persona was a carefully curated blend of old money charm and political gravitas. The Vance family name was practically synonymous with the city's history. They weren't just wealthy, they were an institution. And I, Natalie Reed, the freelance graphic designer who worked from a spare bedroom office in a modest apartment, was apparently not institutional material. A week after the breakup, my phone rang with an unblocked number. My stomach twisted. I knew it was him. I let it go to voicemail. The message he left was steeped in a cloying, false concern that made my skin crawl. "Nat, it's me," Leo's voice said, sounding strained. "Listen, I know you're probably angry, but I just wanted to check in, see how your mom is doing, and I need to arrange to get the ring back. My mother has been asking. It's a family heirloom, you understand, call me." It's a family heirloom, not, "I'm so sorry." Not, "Can we talk?" Just a transactional demand for the return of his property. The 2-carat diamond that had felt so heavy on my finger now felt like a shackle I was all too eager to remove. I agreed to meet him at a neutral coffee shop, a place with no memories attached. When he walked in, he looked just as he always did, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, his hair perfectly styled. But his eyes, which I once thought were kind, now looked shifty and weak. "Natalie," he began, sitting opposite me, "you look tired." "I've been better," I said, my voice flat. I placed a small, velvet box on the table between us. "Here." He slid it into his pocket without even looking at it. "Thank you. This is awkward, I know." "Is it?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. It seemed pretty straightforward to me. You and your father made a business decision. I was a bad investment. He flinched. "It's not like that, it's complicated." "No, it's not, Leo," I said, leaning forward. My voice was low, but it didn't tremble. "You chose your father's approval and your inheritance over me. That's not complicated, it's simple. You made your choice, and I made mine." He frowned, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. "What does that mean?" I just gave a small, enigmatic smile. I was done explaining myself to him. I was done trying to prove my worth. From now on, my actions would speak for themselves. As I stood up to leave, I let a thought surface, a silent mantra that had been repeating in my mind for days. They had forgotten one crucial thing. They saw me as the unstable freelancer, the quirky artist. They had forgotten that in my line of work, I wasn't just an artist. I was a strategist, a brand builder, a storyteller. And I was about to tell the most important story of my career. "Goodbye, Leo," I said, turning my back on him for the last time. As I walked out of the coffee shop, the city air felt crisp and clean. The grief was still there, a dull ache in my chest, but for the first time it was joined by something else. A spark, a tiny, defiant flame of purpose. The Vances thought they had cut me loose. They had no idea they had just armed their most dangerous opponent. They had forgotten one crucial thing. A good designer knows how to control the narrative. To understand the depth of the Vance's betrayal, you have to understand what I had poured into my relationship with Leo. It wasn't just love. It was my unwavering, unconditional support for his own ambition. When we first met, Leo was working a mid-level job at his father's sprawling real estate firm, Vance Development. He complained constantly about being in Harrison's shadow, about his ideas being dismissed, about feeling like a glorified assistant. My father only sees the path he walked. Leo would tell me over late-night dinners. He doesn't get that the world is changing. I have ideas, Nat, big ones. I believed him. I spent countless hours listening to his plans, helping him refine his presentations, and even designing mock-ups for his visionary urban renewal projects, all pro bono, of course. I was his cheerleader, his strategist, his 24/7 creative consultant. When he finally got a promotion to vice president, he credited a sleek, professional portfolio I had designed for him. He took me out to a fancy dinner and toasted to us, calling me his secret weapon. It felt romantic at the time. Now, the memory was laced with the bitter taste of irony. My sacrifices weren't just professional. I had molded my life to fit the rigid contours of the Vance family's world. I attended stuffy charity galas where the conversation was as dry as the canapés. I learned to smile politely when Leo's mother, a woman with a smile as thin as a razor's edge, would make passive-aggressive comments about my little hobby. "It must be so nice," she'd once said, her eyes scanning my simple dress, "to have something to keep you busy while Leo does his important work." The true antagonist, however, was never Leo's mother. It was his father, Mayor Harrison Vance. On the surface, Harrison was the epitome of public service. He was handsome, charismatic, and spoke in reassuring sound bites about tradition, family values, and civic duty. But in private, he was a cold, calculating puppeteer. I remember one dinner at the Vance estate, a sprawling mansion that overlooked the city like a feudal lord's castle. Harrison had been holding court at the head of the dining table, discussing his ongoing mayoral campaign. His opponent, City Councilwoman Alina Parsons, was gaining some traction with a grassroots message, and he was dismissive to the point of arrogance. "She's a firefly in a hurricane," Harrison had boomed, swirling the brandy in his glass. "A momentary distraction. The people of this city know who has the strength and the legacy to lead them." He then turned his piercing blue eyes to me. "Natalie, you're in marketing of a sort. What do you make of her signage, all those garish colors? It looks rather desperate, don't you think?" I felt a dozen pairs of eyes on me. I knew the correct answer was to agree, to flatter his ego. "I think," I said carefully, "that she's trying to connect with a demographic that feels overlooked. The colors are meant to convey energy and change." A chillingly polite smile touched Harrison's lips. "Energy and change are euphemisms for chaos and inexperience," he said, his tone leaving no room for debate. He then looked from me to Leo, a pointed, appraising glance. "A leader needs a partner who understands the gravity of our world, someone who provides stability, not just color." The message was clear. I was the garish, desperate sign. I was the chaos and inexperience. Leo, sitting right beside me, had simply taken a sip of his water and changed the subject. He never defended me, not once. He was a spectator in his own life, and I was just a temporary player he was willing to trade for a better position on the team. The breakup text wasn't a sudden decision. It was the final, logical step in Harrison Vance's long-term plan. He hadn't just disapproved of my career, he had seen my independence as a threat. A freelance designer couldn't be controlled, couldn't be molded into the perfect, smiling political spouse. He didn't want a daughter-in-law, he wanted an accessory, a human extension of the Vance brand, and I was decidedly off-brand. The cruelty of it all was that they made me feel small, insignificant, and disposable. They had no idea that their rejection was the very thing that would ignite the ambition they claimed I lacked. For a week, I wallowed. I allowed myself the full spectrum of grief, the shock, the anger, the profound, soul-crushing sadness. I ate ice cream directly from the carton and watched black and white movies that matched my mood. But as my mother grew stronger, so did my resolve. The image of Harrison Vance's smug, dismissive face was a constant, infuriating presence in my mind. He thought my work was color. He was about to learn that color, when wielded correctly, could be a weapon. The turning point came not with a bang, but with a quiet click of a mouse. 3 weeks before Leo had sent that fateful text, I had received a discreet inquiry through my professional website. The email was from a woman named Sarah, the campaign manager for a local political candidate. They were looking for a complete brand overhaul, a new logo, a new visual identity, a new digital strategy. They had a limited budget but a lot of passion. They needed someone who could create a miracle. Intrigued, I had agreed to a confidential video call. When the face of City Councilwoman Alina Parsons appeared on my screen, I nearly dropped my laptop. She was Harrison Vance's only Serious opponent. She was warm, intelligent, and spoke with a fiery passion about affordable housing, community programs, and taking back the city from the corporate interests that Harrison and his firm, Vance Development, represented. "Mr. Vance has the money and the machine," Alina had told me, her eyes earnest. "I just have the people, but the people aren't hearing me. My message is getting lost. They see me as well-meaning but not powerful. I need to look powerful, Natalie. Can you do that?" Before the breakup, I had hesitated. Working against my fiancé's father felt complicated. But now there were no complications. There was only a clear, righteous path forward. I opened my laptop, pulled up my old proposal for Alina's campaign, and wrote back a single sentence: "I'm in, and I'm cutting my fee in half." This wasn't just a job anymore, it was a mission. I turned my apartment into a strategic war room. The walls of my office, once covered with wedding dress swatches and venue photos, were now plastered with demographic data, polling numbers, and color psychology charts. I dove into the project with a ferocity that surprised even myself. My heartbreak became fuel. My anger became focus. My unstable, freelance career had given me a unique set of skills that the Vance political machine, with its old-school consultants and stuffy ad agencies, could never replicate. I was nimble. I was a digital native. I understood how to make a message go viral on a shoestring budget. The first thing I did was scrap Alina's entire existing brand. The garish colors Harrison had mocked were gone. I developed a new palette, a deep, trustworthy navy blue paired with a vibrant, optimistic gold. It was classic yet modern. It conveyed strength and hope. Next, I designed the logo. It was my masterstroke. Instead of a generic, patriotic symbol, I created a stylized image of the city's most iconic bridge, its arches formed by two interlocking hands. It was a visual metaphor for connection, community, and bridging the gap between the powerful and the people. It was simple, memorable, and emotionally resonant. With the core branding established, I launched my investigation. I wasn't a private investigator, but I was an expert in digital forensics. I spent days analyzing Harrison Vance's online presence, his campaign's messaging, and his company's public records. I wasn't looking for personal dirt, I was looking for strategic weaknesses. I discovered that while Vance's campaign talked a big game about building the future, his own company, Vance Development, had a trail of controversial projects that had displaced small businesses and driven up housing costs in working-class neighborhoods. The information was all public, but it was buried in dense zoning documents and council meeting minutes. No one had ever connected the dots in a simple, visual way. This was my clever trap. I began designing a series of sharp, clean infographics and short, shareable videos. Each one told a simple story. While Mayor Vance promised you community, Vance Development tore it down. I used his own words against him, contrasting his lofty campaign slogans with the stark reality of his business practices. I sent the first batch of designs to Alina's campaign manager, Sarah. Her response came back in minutes. "Sarah, Natalie, this is incredible. It's not just a logo, it's a narrative, it's a weapon. How did you do this?" I sat back in my chair. a slow, determined smile spreading across my face. "Me, you said you needed a miracle. I'm just getting started." The game was on. The Vances thought they had sidelined me, but I was about to checkmate them from a position they never even knew was on the board. The first ripple of our new campaign hit the city like a quiet tremor. We launched the new branding for Alina Parsons on a Monday morning. The logo of the interlocking hands and the new Parsons for the People slogan appeared across social media, accompanied by a single, powerful video I had edited myself. It was a montage of Alina speaking at community centers, listening to seniors, and marching with local activists, all set to an uplifting score. It was everything the Vance campaign wasn't: authentic, grounded, and human. The online response was immediate and overwhelming. The video was shared thousands of times. The logo was praised for its cleverness and heart. For the first time, the narrative around the election began to shift. Commentators who had previously dismissed Alina as a long shot were now calling her campaign re-energized and surprisingly savvy. I was tracking the metrics from my apartment, a thrill running through me with every new share and positive comment. The Vances, with all their money and power, had been caught completely off guard. A few days later, I ran into Leo. It was inevitable in a city this size. I was picking up coffee when he walked in, his eyes immediately finding mine. He looked flustered. His usual polished veneer slightly cracked. "Nat," he said, walking over to my table, "can we talk for a second?" "There's nothing to talk about, Leo," I said coolly, not looking up from my laptop. "No, just about the campaign," he said, gesturing vaguely. "My father's campaign. Have you seen what Parsons is doing? Her new branding it's everywhere." I finally met his gaze, allowing a small, neutral smile to play on my lips. "I've seen it. It's effective, isn't it?" "Effective? It's a problem," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. "Our poll numbers dipped for the first time this week. My father is furious. He's yelling at his consultants, asking them how they let a no-name councilwoman suddenly look like a serious contender." He paused, looking at me with a strange intensity. "That logo, it's good. It's the kind of thing you would design." My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my expression placid. This was the first test. "It's a strong concept," I said simply, my voice even. "Clear message, connects with people." He was still staring at me, a seed of suspicion clearly planted in his mind. "It's just, the timing is weird. We break up, and suddenly my father's opponent has a killer campaign designed by some anonymous genius. It's a little too coincidental, don't you think?" This was my moment. I could have denied it, played dumb. Instead, I chose to fan the flame of his paranoia. I slowly closed my laptop, stood up, and looked him directly in the eye. "Leo, the world doesn't revolve around you and your father. Maybe your opponent just found someone with a little ambition." I used his own cruel word against him, and I saw it land like a physical blow. The confusion on his face was immensely satisfying. I walked out of the coffee shop, leaving him standing there, his mind racing. He didn't know the truth, not yet, but he suspected, and the suspicion was just as destabilizing. Later that week, the Vance campaign retaliated. They launched a series of clumsy, negative ads, trying to paint Alina as a radical socialist who would bankrupt the city. But the attacks felt desperate and old-fashioned compared to our positive, community-focused message. Then I deployed the second phase of my plan, the infographics. The first one went live on a Thursday. It was a simple, elegant design. On the left, a quote from Harrison Vance's inauguration speech: "I promise to protect the heart and soul of our city's historic neighborhoods." On the right, a map of a historic district with 3 small businesses highlighted in red under the heading, "Demolished by Vance Development for a Luxury Condominium Project." It was a bombshell. It was shared by local news outlets, community groups, and outraged citizens. The story wasn't about politics anymore, it was about hypocrisy. It was about a mayor who said one thing and did another. The antagonist's reaction was exactly what I had predicted. That evening, Harrison Vance held an emergency press conference. He looked rattled, his usual charisma replaced by a thin veneer of rage. He didn't address the facts. Instead, he lashed out. "This is a desperate, baseless smear campaign," he thundered, his face red. "My opponent is resorting to gutter politics, using doctored information and outright lies to mislead the public. My family has built this city, and we will not be torn down by these pathetic, amateurish attacks." He called the attacks amateurish. The word choice was a gift. The public saw a powerful man throwing a tantrum, refusing to answer a simple question. His poorly executed threats and obvious lies only confirmed the narrative I was building. He wasn't the strong, stable leader he claimed to be. He was a bully, cornered and exposed. From my apartment, I watched him self-destruct on live television. I took a sip of my tea, my hand perfectly steady. The trap was working perfectly. And the worst was yet to come for the House of Vance. Harrison Vance's televised meltdown was a turning point. His anger, meant to project strength, came across as sheer panic. Our internal polling at the Parsons campaign showed a dramatic shift. Eleanor was no longer just a challenger. She was a genuine contender, and for the first time, she was pulling ahead of the incumbent. The Vance dynasty was vulnerable. Their desperation manifested in uglier ways. They doubled down on their negative ads, but now they felt personal. One ad insinuated that Eleanor, a former teacher, was anti-business and would drive jobs out of the city. It featured dark, grainy photos of boarded-up storefronts. It was a classic fear-mongering tactic, but I had already prepared the countermove. Within hours, we released a series of short video testimonials. They featured the actual owners of the small businesses that had been displaced by Vance development. There was Maria, the baker whose family had run a pastry shop for 50 years. There was Sam, the third-generation tailor. They spoke with quiet dignity and heartbreaking clarity about how their dreams had been bulldozed to make way for another of Harrison Vance's gleaming, empty luxury towers. The contrast was devastating. Harrison's ad used anonymous, scary images. Our response used the real faces and real stories of the people his company had hurt. The public saw the truth, and the hashtag #VanceVsThePeople started trending citywide. The pressure was clearly getting to Leo. He called me again, his voice frayed. "Natalie, you have to tell me if this is you. My father is losing his mind. He's threatening lawsuits. He's convinced there's a mole in his company feeding Parsons information." "All the information I'm using is a matter of public record, Leo," I said, my voice cold as ice. The I slipped out, a calculated error. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "You, so it is you," he whispered, his voice a mixture of awe and horror. "You're doing all of this." "You said I lacked ambition," I reminded him softly. "I decided to find some." "This isn't ambition, Natalie, this is revenge," he shot back, his voice rising. "You're destroying my family." "Your family was already destroying itself with its own hypocrisy," I replied calmly. "I'm just holding up a mirror. Is that all, Leo? I have a campaign to run." I hung up before he could respond. The conversation left me shaken, but more determined than ever. He was still defending them. Even now, faced with the truth of his father's actions, his first instinct was to protect the family name. The last vestiges of my affection for him withered and died in that moment. My investigation continued. Digging deeper into Vance Development's public filings, I uncovered the masterstroke, the final, irrefutable piece of evidence. It was a proposal for a massive waterfront redevelopment project, Harrison's crowning achievement, which was set to be announced the week before the election. The project was being sold to the public as a beautiful new park and public space. But buried deep in the appendices of the 400-page proposal was the truth. The park was a sliver of green space surrounding 3 enormous luxury high-rises. And the construction contract, worth hundreds of millions of dollars, was slated to go to a subsidiary company owned, through a series of shell corporations, by Harrison Vance himself. He wasn't just using his office to enrich his company, He was planning to personally profit from a taxpayer-funded project. It was corrupt, it was audacious, and it was the kill shot we needed. I presented my findings to Alina and her campaign manager, Sarah, in their bustling, makeshift headquarters. The room fell silent as I walked them through the documents, highlighting the shell companies and the flow of money. He was going to announce this next week, I explained, as his grand gift to the city. He would have been hailed as a hero, and the election would have been over. Alina looked at the documents, then up at me, her eyes wide with disbelief and gratitude. He would have gotten away with it. People like him always think they will, I said. This was the irrefutable proof we needed. It was no longer about contrasting messages or pointing out past hypocrisies. This was clear, undeniable, and potentially illegal. We had the power to not only end his political career, but to expose him for exactly what he was. The final confrontation was no longer a question of if, but when. We decided to hold our fire. We would wait for the perfect moment, the moment of his greatest arrogance, to deploy the final, devastating truth. The stage was set for a showdown on election night itself. Election day arrived under a crisp autumn sky. A nervous energy crackled through the city. The polls were neck and neck, a scenario that had been unthinkable just 2 months prior. The Vance machine, once an unstoppable juggernaut, was sputtering, wounded by 1,000 small cuts delivered with strategic precision. I spent the day at the Parsons campaign headquarters, a converted warehouse space buzzing with the frenetic energy of hopeful volunteers. The air was thick with the smell of coffee and ozone from the humming computer monitors. My work was done. The narrative had been written. Now, all we could do was wait for the people to read it. As the polls closed at 8 p.m., the initial returns began to trickle in. My heart pounded against my ribs with every update. District by district, the numbers flashed on the giant screen at the front of the room. It was impossibly close. We'd win a neighborhood, then they'd win one. The lead swung back and forth by a few hundred votes. Meanwhile, news channels kept cutting to the Vance campaign's election night party. It was being held in the grand ballroom of a luxury hotel his company owned. The scene was a parody of opulence. Crystal chandeliers, champagne fountains, and guests dripping in jewels and designer suits. In the center of it all stood Harrison Vance, projecting an aura of unflappable confidence, with Leo and his mother smiling stiffly by his side. They were performing victory, assuming their birthright would be delivered as it always had been. At 9:45 p.m., the tide began to turn. The final, working-class districts, the very ones we had focused our campaign on, began to report, and they were reporting overwhelmingly for Alina. A cheer went up in our headquarters, tentative at first, then growing into a roar as the numbers solidified. The blue bar representing Parsons crept past the red bar for Vance, and this time it didn't look back. At 10:17 p.m., the city's major news network made the call. A banner flashed across the screen. ELEANOR Parsons wins mayoral race in stunning upset. The warehouse erupted. Volunteers were hugging, crying, and screaming with joy. I felt a wave of dizzying relief wash over me, so potent it almost buckled my knees. We had done it. The impossible had happened. Sarah, her face streaked with happy tears, threw her arms around me. "You did this, Natalie. You did this." My gaze was fixed on the television. The camera zoomed in on Harrison Vance's face just as the announcement was made. His confident smile froze, then collapsed. He looked utterly, completely stunned. The mask of the powerful patriarch had shattered, revealing the bewildered, defeated man beneath. Leo stood beside him, his face ashen, his eyes wide with horror as he stared into the camera, as if he were looking directly at me. But the night wasn't over. This was the moment we had been waiting for. As Harrison stepped to the podium to deliver a terse, bitter concession speech, a well-placed source at the news station, a journalist who owed Alina a favor, asked him a final question. "Mr. Mayor, your opponent ran on a platform of transparency. Will you now comment on the allegations regarding the waterfront redevelopment project and its connection to your personal finances? The color drained from Harrison's face. He stammered, calling it a last-minute, desperate lie, but the damage was done. The seed had been planted on live television. Then it was Alina's turn. She took the stage at our headquarters to a thunderous ovation. She was radiant, her face glowing with the kind of authentic joy that money could never buy. She thanked her family, her volunteers, and the people of the city. Then she paused, her eyes scanning the crowd until they found me. "There is one more person I have to thank," she said, her voice ringing with sincerity. "The architect of this victory. The person whose brilliance and vision turned this campaign around. She asked to remain anonymous, but tonight she deserves to take a bow. Please welcome my lead strategist, Ms. Natalie Reed." A spotlight swung to find me in the crowd. For a heartbeat, I froze. This was not part of the plan. But as Alina beckoned to me with a warm smile, I felt a surge of pride. I walked towards the stage, my steps steady, as the crowd parted for me. The cameras zoomed in, broadcasting my face to the entire city. I could picture the scene in that ballroom perfectly. Leo and his father, watching in utter disbelief as the woman they had cast aside as unstable and ambitionless was being celebrated as the genius who had engineered their downfall. I stood beside Alina, the new mayor, and smiled directly into the camera. It wasn't a smile of revenge, it was a smile of liberation. A smile that said, "I understand now. I understood my own worth. And now, so did they." The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for the Vance family. The morning after the election, the story wasn't just about Alina Parsons' historic victory. It was about the spectacular implosion of a political dynasty. Every news outlet in the city, and several national ones, picked up the story, a delicious narrative of betrayal, hubris, and poetic justice. My face was everywhere, right next to Leo's. The headlines wrote themselves: "Jilted Fiancé gets ultimate revenge. How a broken engagement toppled a mayor. The designer behind the upset." The story of Leo's callous breakup text, leaked by a source close to the campaign, became the salacious detail that made the story irresistible. The waterfront scandal, which I had so carefully unearthed, became the subject of an official city investigation. Faced with mounting evidence and public pressure, Harrison Vance's carefully constructed empire began to crumble. He resigned from the board of Vance Development, his reputation in tatters. The man who had once ruled the city was now a recluse, a prisoner in the very mansion from which he had once looked down on everyone else. His legacy was not one of strength, but of corruption and shame. Leo tried to contact me, of course. His first attempts were a flurry of frantic, angry text messages from new numbers, accusing me of ruining his life. When I didn't respond, the tone shifted to desperate, pleading. Voicemails. "Natalie, please, just talk to me," he said in one message, his voice cracking. "I was a fool, I know that now. My father, he controlled everything. I was weak, but I never stopped loving you. We can fix this, please." I listened to the message once, then deleted it without a second thought. There was nothing to fix. He wasn't sorry for what he did, he was sorry he got caught. He was sorry he had bet on the losing team. The man I had loved had never really existed. He was just a hollow shell filled with his father's ambitions. My own life, in stark contrast, blossomed. My one-woman design firm, Natalie Reed Creative, was inundated with offers. Corporations, nonprofits, and even national political campaigns wanted to hire the woman who had single-handedly rebranded a city's future. I was finally able to hire a small team, moving out of my spare bedroom office and into a beautiful, light-filled studio downtown. I was no longer just a freelancer. I was the founder and creative director of a sought-after agency. I had the stability I had built for myself on my own terms. A few months after the election, Mayor Alina Parsons invited me to her new office at City Hall. It was a bright, airy space, filled with plants instead of imposing portraits. The logo I had designed for her, The interlocking hands was beautifully embossed on the wall behind her desk. "I still feel like I should be paying you a lifetime retainer," she said with a warm laugh, handing me a cup of coffee. "Seeing you in this chair is payment enough," I replied honestly. We sat and talked for over an hour, not as client and contractor, but as friends. We talked about her plans for the city, the challenges she faced, and the hope she felt. As I was leaving, she put a hand on my arm. "You know, Natalie," she said, her expression serious. "What you did was brilliant, but I hope you know that your worth was never tied to what you could do for me or what you did to them. You were always enough, just as you were." Her words hit me with a surprising force, unlocking the last, tight knot of pain in my chest. She was right. The victory wasn't over the Vances. The true victory was the moment I chose to fight for myself. That evening, I stood on the balcony of my new apartment, looking out at the glittering city skyline. The iconic bridge that had inspired my logo stretched across the water, its lights twinkling in the twilight. It was a city I had helped to reshape, a future I had helped to write. The wound of betrayal had been deep, but from it, something strong and beautiful had grown. I was at peace, finally and completely. The ambition they claimed I lacked had not only given me a career beyond my wildest dreams, it had given me back to myself.